Yeah, for me, I think if you're interested in retailing or if you're interested in communication whatsoever, you have to be interested in people. It starts there. And be curious about what could be. And the majority of things that we do and I drive as well it's cross-referencing, like in maybe awkward and strange ways to find things that people don't see fit together, but make them fit or make them not fit. And then there is a healthy friction that is interesting to go into as well. So I'm always like trying to look for this friction in things.
I'm Carolyn Hadlock, the founder of the Beautiful Thinkers Project. On the podcast, I talk with founders, CEOs, creatives, scholars, and artists about beautiful thinking. Season 7 is focused on Scandinavia because they just get so many things right from a social, economic, political, and of course, design perspective. In today's conversation with Marcus Engman, you'll hear how he creates design for change, where he sees the future of retail going, and why it's dangerous to apply systems thinking to creativity. This morning, we are talking with Marcus Engman, who is the Chief Creative Officer of IKEA. Hi, Marcus.
Hi, pleased to meet you.
Good morning. Nice to meet you as well. How's your morning? How's your day going?
Pretty well, I guess. Depends on how you look upon it. Sorry for
Yeah.
sitting in this expressive room also. It's like I'm in a hotel right now.
And I believe you are in Stockholm today. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm in a snowy place called Stockholm. It's kind of chaotic here, actually. It's really cold.
Well, welcome to the show. We are very excited to have you. We're going to kind of bounce around a little bit, but I think the place to start is what is your remit as in your function at IKEA?
What I try to do is to stretch IKEA in all the work. So my role is very much to look upon what could happen next and what that could look like in different ways by doing exhibitions or doing collaborations or like coming home to people to find like new problems for us to solve and so on.
Yeah, and I read that you are, if I think about it in this way, that you are helping to shape sort of the future of retail, not just at IKEA, but just in general, which is fascinating to me. And I know that you have said that there's a lot of people who are very afraid of the death of retail, and that you see it as an opportunity. And I just was curious to hear you talk about that. In what ways do you see it as an opportunity?
I think just because it's going down, it's an opportunity in itself. I mean, I've always liked to do like the very opposite of where everybody else is going. And right now, everybody's going away from retail. Then I think it's a good time to go there just to show that it's possible. It's a little bit like if you see retail, not just as a sales point, but also like a media. I think actually the media situation, which we are living in currently, which is quite fragmented and all over the place, and it's really hard for companies and brands to make like breakthroughs. Then I think actually coming closer to where you are and what you are is going to be even more important for the future. So I very much see like the development of retail is not just retail; it's actually a development of your own media situation. So, and
Yeah.
that I find like fascinating.
I think that's interesting. And in it, even I think I was reading something where you were talking about retail programming and how you sort of program, events, times, seasons, which I think is a very interesting way to think about it.
Yeah, exactly. Like back in the day when I started out working with retailing, it was very much about the design of the store and the flows and so on, which is of course still like super important. But I think now it's more what's happening there, and how you could have a lot of things happening during a day and during a
Yeah.
week, during a month. So it's far more like some kind of I wouldn't call it like retail entertainment because it sounds like you're going to pull in like artists and stuff, but it's more like actually more connecting with people in different ways. And I think that's interesting. It's hard, but it's fun.
Yeah. I definitely sense that as I was looking through your work and have been a longtime fan of your work. Of just it seems like you just have this love for people in bringing them together and just seeing what spontaneously is going to come from that, whether it's in a store or in Milan.
Yeah, for me, it's I think if you're interested in retailing, or if you're interested in communication whatsoever, you have to be interested in people. It starts there. And be curious about what could be. And the majority of things that we do, and I drive as well, is it's cross-referencing, like in maybe awkward and strange ways, to find things that people don't see fit together, but make them fit or make them not fit. And then there is a healthy friction that is interesting to go into as well. So I'm always like trying to look for this friction in things.
Yeah, and that you just described in the way I think a lot about beautiful thinking is those sort of associations that create frictions and opportunities for, new connections, new conversations, and new experiences. That's awesome. Well, you said it a second ago, but I want to talk about growing up IKEA and just how, you started when you were in high school. I mean, as a high schooler, what did you think about IKEA when you were working there?
Was the like the last place I wanted to work at, to be honest. Because I'm kind of brought up in like an IKEA family also. This is the sad story of my life. So both my mother and my father used to work for IKEA. My sister still works for IKEA. My wife works for IKEA, and so forth. So what I wanted at that time when I still was in school was absolutely not to work for IKEA. But anyhow, I started out pushing trolleys in a store on weekends and so on, earning some money. And that's how it all started. Then went into store design, actually working as an interior designer for IKEA, and from that into range strategies and product development in Älmhult then. And from out of that, going into doing marketing. So I was marketing manager for IKEA in Sweden. And then I left the company for a while and working with retail development for a lot of companies in my own agency that I started together with a friend.
Yeah.
So that was for 12 years. Then came back, honestly, to this crazy company because they were asking me, like, just by the way, because they were looking for a new design manager. And the story goes is that my father used to be like the design manager, and he was like retired, and they wanted to find a new one after him. So they asked a couple of people who's like typical IKEA people like me,
Yeah.
who could it be? And then I popped some names for them, and then kind of got a little bit like interested myself into it. So I said maybe I'm interested, and then I started out as head of design for IKEA.
Yeah, you're the second Eggman to be head of design. And
Yeah,
how,
strange, isn't
yeah, it's
it?
amazing. How do you think, and I know time plays a factor in it, and what the times were, but how did you approach the function differently than your dad?
But I think it came kind of natural that because we were, uh, our view upon things and our education was very different from each other. He was actually a trained designer from the very beginning. I mostly worked like in strategies and in communication. So that was just two different ways of going about it. He was far more about the craft of design, and I was more about the strategy on where and how you could use design as communication. The approach was very different from the very beginning. Then I think that we appreciated the same things. So what good looks like might have been the same, but how it took us there
How you
was different.
got there? Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, that makes a lot of sense. As I look at the work that you have brought into the world, I think about design and designers as very intentional and very, disciplined and systematic. And yet I look at your work and I just feel like, oh, I don't even like it doesn't even you take this exploded view of design, whereas you don't seem to have an outcome in mind. That's how it seems to me, that it's a starting point, but then you don't really know where it's going to go. And is that true? And if it's so, where does that come from?
No, it's not really true, I must say.
You do a
But
good job of it.
maybe like a really maybe a more exploratory approach, and I really go with trust a lot when I do it. But I think all of the collaborations and everything we did, we were really on to what is the thing that we wanted to change. Maybe not how's the product going to look like, or at the end of the day, or materialities and stuff like that. We didn't start the typical design way, but we started more like from what is the change that we wanted to achieve. I mean, the things with like taking like collections that we did with if Ilse Crawford, for instance, we talked and met before, and we were all about, let's bring tactility back to interior design. It's kind of a forgotten thing when it comes to mass-produced articles, that actually the tactility of surfaces and choices there, and how could, because that's so important to make like a homey home.
Mm.
So could we design that and something that you see and feel in that sense? So that was a change we wanted to achieve with that. And then from out of that, it came into like big industrial revolutions on how you work with cork in completely new ways and so on that we have never done before. And also like new surface treatments for metal. And that kind of innovation came from out of the idea of what we wanted to achieve and change from the beginning. And so that's I tried to shy away because there's always been this discussion around like collaborations and collabs. It's so much about like brands rubbing off on each other.
Hmm.
I've never been interested in that part, actually. It's more about who could be a good person or company to work with to solve this problem or this possibility of change that we wanted to achieve. So that's more like the approach on things.
Another word that comes to mind when I think of you and your work is movement and dynamism, and I think you just articulated maybe the difference is a lot of designers, and you do have to solve a problem, but I think you're going to a more zoomed out view of what change do I want to create, and then who can help me do that, which is super interesting, and I just think it brings a dynamism to the work. And as we look at the home, the original definition, the old English definition of home came from the word ham, which is, I think they define it as a village or a state where many souls are gathered, which I think is a really
A
lovely way to
beautiful
think of.
way of putting it.
Yeah. But I feel like now, especially I've just read through the latest Life at Home report that you all did, but home it can be a address or a zip code or a country or a state of mind. And I'm curious to hear you talk about how do you define home, and then how do you then apply that knowledge and knowing to the work that you do?
I think that first of all, there's a difference between the physical space and the notion of feeling at home. I
Mm,
think you have to start there because you could feel at home. I mean, I have like 150 travel days a year.
wow.
So for me, the feeling at home is more important to me than the actual home. What we've learned also, and I think the interesting part here is also like my notion of home is very much, and knowledge about home, the little I have, is very much influenced by our ways of working with like home visits and the all of those homes it's like hundreds of homes that I've had the possibility to visit all over the world, which is so fascinating.
This is my room. That's my bed. It's pretty practical because you can stuff things underneath it.
I'm spending a lot of time at home writing and reading. I have so many books. My favorite chair, where I spend 10 hours a day.
And this thing about not relying on just reports or like big companies doing surveys for you and so on, but actually this first-hand thinking
Yeah.
and firsthand taking the work to actually go there and meet these people and to talk to them and to also see how they behave and what makes them feel good and so on. I was in Japan a couple of months ago doing home visits there, going to a person who actually lived like in 12 square meters.
The
And we thought that
musician,
was
I read about
yeah,
that.
yeah, you heard about it. It's kind of that was so fascinating because you could come from the place when you're living in Sweden, where the majority of people live quite big compared to a lot of other countries, because like we have a lot of space in Sweden
Yeah.
and not so many inhabitants. And it's the opposite, of course, in Tokyo. But for me, then living in Sweden, I thought, oh, but this is like a home where you live maybe for a couple of months and then, an in between thing. But he had been
Hmm.
living there for 7 years and had a completely different view upon this. That's like fascinating. And then you come down to the things that everybody's talking about, like clutter and so on. Every single choice of what to buy was like a really big choice for him
Yeah.
because he had to take something out. If you have like 11 or 12 square meters of what it was. Those are big decisions then. So it's kind of a sustainable behavior without thinking of it as a sustainable behavior. So those things are super interesting.
You talked about, you'd always thought about small space design, of course, in the cities and where all over the world that people are living in. But I think you said this one was like micro space design.
Micro living, yeah, something like that. I was like way beyond like small space, the way of thinking
Yeah.
that there, because it
Yeah.
was also like you in those square meters. It was actually a small. I wouldn't call it a kitchen, but maybe a place where to cook, and it was a bathroom inside of those spaces. And he was then a musician, was doing the horn and playing inside of that. So everything that he when he was like training for his concerts and stuff was done in that small place. Yeah, but that's like home visit. But we have taken it to extremes also. So I mean, I still remember we did like bathrooms. That's kind of an interesting one of the place or two places that I find interesting in homes also. Not so much about the homey feeling of them, but they're like areas that are call them a highway of the homes, which is more like bathrooms and entrances. These are
Mm.
places that people don't think about. Like bathroom has become like the home spa, but before it was the home spa, and to the majority of people, it's not the home spa; it's still a bathroom. It's
Yeah.
this place that is like it's empty 95% of the time. But
Hmm.
those other 5%, everybody wants to be there at the same time. So it's
Yeah.
kind of a highway situation. And it's the same thing with the entrance. Yeah, when you use it a lot, and then it's like you're not there at all. And to design for those kind of spaces is designing for extremes, and that's interesting. So I think that everybody who's into designing for homes is like you go into the extremes. If you solve the extremes, it's easy to do the others. This is like back in the 90s or something. We did like a completely new, we did a revision of the range of everything around bathrooms. And at the time, we actually went and lived in people's homes. I lived together with a family for I think 3 days there just to see how they used it and time things and what's the problem, what do you fight with your kids around, and who's taking how long is like a normal shower, all of these things. So really going into depth, and that's interesting. And then I think like the second part of this is of course that it creates like a, a relation to the IKEA brand, which I
Mm.
think is also like a hands-on relation. If people
Yeah.
understand and meet people from IKEA that are genuinely interesting in their life and how they solve their everyday life, that says a lot about the brand also, far more than any kind of advertisement that we could do. And along the way, during the years, this builds. So I think it's important for creating relations as well. So that was one interesting part. And then we saw actually we're mostly looking for similarities. When we go out and look into the world, it's like finding similarities, because similarities will be like possibilities to do like great product development for that are like sold at scale. And when it came to actually the entrances, there's quite big cultural and architectural differences between countries. There are a
Yeah.
lot of countries like Southern Europe that don't have any entrance. You go straight into the home. There is no entrance area in Scandinavia, and that's due to mostly, like I would say, the weather situation.
Mm.
Scandinavia, you need to have some kind of, you know, you
Yeah.
need to pass through something to get leave the winter behind you before you enter the home, more or less,
Yeah.
which is not the situation in like southern parts of France or in Italy, for instance.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And then I guess that takes me to my next thought of I know you love cities. You said you have 150 travel days. You've traveled all over the world, and that you like to walk cities to get the feel of them. And one of my questions is I was thinking, what makes it a city? Like, what makes a city? Is there something in your mind that you could say universally, you walk through it and you said, this is definitely a city?
That's a good question. I never thought about it like that, actually. What makes a city? I think it's the more you travel, you don't think about it as cities anymore. I
Mm.
I see it more like clusters of neighborhoods. And then you come into the question, what makes a neighborhood? Yeah, you see that there is like a population that has something in common that are hanging out to a large extent. And the thing I've seen also, the more I travel in cities, you see also that your neighborhood is a part of your home a lot of the time. And I think this is something that has accelerated also. It's maybe it wasn't like that from the very beginning but it's become more and more important to people actually where you live because I think it's also like practical reasons because people can't afford to live like big anymore. And then you need to see your coffee shop is like, okay, so that's my breakfast room. And so
Yeah.
you extend your home by incorporating the neighborhood into your home, more or less.
And I feel the pandemic also did that too. I mean, I think we used to go out for a lot of things, and then of course pandemic hit, and then we're finding all those functions inside of our home. And I think that put a lot more attention on the people around you.
Yeah. And I mean, again, going back to people, it's important.
What's your favorite city to walk?
You know, I have a couple of favorite cities. Love Tokyo. Of course, everybody loves Tokyo because it's so hard to understand. Then I spend like every second week. I mean, I spend like days in London also. So this is like my second home more or less, and I really love it. And there's still like it's big enough also to like discover new areas all the time. Small areas of London that you haven't seen, even if I've been there so many times. It's like I like that kind of city. I'm not like a big fan of going back to things. I like to see like new things. So
Mm,
if I go to London, so there's a where could we go this time that we haven't been?
I have always felt that the birthplace of beautiful thinking is Japan, and you sort of talked about it in an interview you did about how that's a place where there's such a confluence of old and new.
Yeah, and also as a Westerner, I can't speak for people living in Japan, but what I see coming there is also that there's a genuine respect both uh, between people, but also
Mm.
for things. There a lot of things has a value that maybe has lost its value in other parts of the world, and I think
Yeah.
that's interesting to see why is that and how could it be kept. The very fact that you could see like small kids traveling by themselves going to like school or so on all of the subways and that's beautiful. That's how it
Mm.
should be. And how could you keep that up in such a big country with so many people? That needs to be something about respect for each other, which is nice.
Again, back to people.
Yeah.
Well, there's I love the wabi sabi, the pottery where they celebrate the scars with gold instead of trying to hide it. I think there's something really lovely in that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That you don't just discard things just because they got like a chip in them or so on. They keep using them just in new ways, adding value to it instead. That's also super nice.
Exactly. And going the opposite way, which is, I think the DNA of your design approach is to where everybody else is going, you go the opposite way. And that is definitely instead of hiding it, celebrate it and make it meaningful. And but I like the idea of respect for objects and people and the expression of that, kids being able to have autonomy and be independent. You talked about partnerships a minute ago, and how you said a lot of brands just they try and scale through partnerships, and you rub off on each other, and you get more impressions, and you kind of buy credibility, which is exactly the opposite of how you approach partnerships from what I can tell. But do you have a certain criteria? You've worked with so many different, from Virgil Abloh to um, Solange Knowles to Adidas to Chris Stamp. Like, what is the criteria that you have in your mind when you're reaching out to find a partner?
First of all, it's like a lot of these people was also like reaching out to us. So
Yeah.
it was not like always like IKEA going out to them, but it was like IKEA in itself is kind of fascinating. That's what's I mean, that's why I'm there still. So I think that's part of it. But honestly, it was never about certain persons from the beginning. It was more like going out, finding that thing that we wanted to change, who could be the best one doing it, and the non-obvious choice also for doing it. So Virgil Abloh that everybody like talks about, and the exhibition that we or the collection that we did together, actually met before Virgil was like a household name. So that was quite a few years before. We just met in Milan for some reason, which I don't really remember. Then we started out chatting around, the fact that a lot of young people don't really relate to the home in the same way that
Mm.
our generation did. And it was kind of and we both felt that it's such an important part for your well-being, and to feel like nice and to be able to achieve things, that you understand how important the home is and what it could do for you. So we started out talking about that. So that was like a conversation, and then coming back to, okay, so maybe we should do something that would actually make people, like an educational kind of collection, that would educate people about different parts, about materials, but also the history of design. There was a lot of referencing
Mm.
backwards in that collection that we did. So it was, again, the boring answer is that it is not like starting in the person. It's more like starting in the thing that we wanted to achieve.
Yeah, it was a brilliant choice. And when you're doing those types of partnerships, how do you how does creative autonomy, how do you work inside of those partnerships? And because they are all very unique and different and of the person, but also have a sense of the ethos of the IKEA brand. How do you structure that how do you protect that, I guess?
I think it's kind of fun. Could go to the one that we got going right now, that we're doing together with Annie Leibovitz, which is a completely different breed. I mean, it's not products; it's actually more like a research work, because from out of what we saw from our own research, we saw that a scary fact, one could say, that 48% of people around the world don't see the way that the life at home and home furnishing is portrayed is not for them, more or less.
Yeah.
They can't relate to it. It's something superficial. That's quite a lot. It's not just the IKEA way of doing it, but all in all, what they see, which is then working in design and interior design and so on. That's a scary thought, that we're actually half of the people, we're not like at all close to them. So then finding a person that could find a new way of portraying the home and the importance of the home, and maybe the relation between people and the home also, to try out new ways and maybe new aesthetics. Then I think you dare to a little bit like let go of yourself and your brand, and go with trust, with the creatives that you're engaging in this. That's always been my kind of approach. And I think that we start off always like, no matter what it's about, to discuss a lot of what we want to achieve. Not saying, not ever talking about looks. I've never been interested in that part. More talking about, how it speaks. Because to me, like design, as we're going back to the difference between me and my father, maybe, I think that's great design communicates. Either it communicates to the person. It starts like a relation. So a
Hmm.
product that, it's like great design starts a relation with the person who actually buys it and uses it. And it's also like a tool for connecting and communication in between people. So to me, it's always been about how do we communicate? What is the thing here? How could we relate and make people relate to it? And then it could end up in so many different materials or looks, or those things are more like trends that are changing over time. It's not like
Right.
timeless. If it's going to be pink or yellow or what kind of metal, I really don't care, because that's always going to change. Of course, we should be on top of it, and what are people curious about? But that's not like, for me, it's never been the essence of design and creativity. That's something else.
Yeah, and design is communication. I feel like what I'm hearing you and I see it in your work as well is just it's and maybe this is where you shift from your father's more maybe academic view of design and I feel when you create things, it's how it makes somebody feel. Do you know what I mean? Like it's a nonverbal. They may not even be able to articulate why they love it or why it facilitates connection between them and their friends or them and themselves or them and their home. And so there's kind of an unspoken thing I think that happens in your designs that creates that element of surprise, but also um, complete, unique to the person that's experiencing it. So I think that's a really fascinating aspect of your
I think
work.
it's also like super. I'm really happy that you say so. I've never thought that I've ever achieved that, to be honest, together with anyone. Always strive to do it because it like I mean the that emotional connection has always been very dear to me. Try to get that all the time, no matter what you try to do. It's more like going for the heart and for the brain of people.
Absolutely. And I think the way that you do it, whether it's Milan or I can envision what you're going to be doing in Paris, but you just create these sort of sensorial worlds, you know, and you bring all the senses and I imagine you think about all those senses, just the idea of, you know, tactility is kind of that lost sense and how that translates and transmits into people when they interact with your products and the experiences that you create, but they just look lush and amazing.
Thank you. That's lovely. Yeah, but when it comes to like event design and so on, which is it's kind of the same thing. I've always tried to work like really multidisciplinary there. So I've always like it's not like you didn't see like a rave going on in Milan or you know open for all and then we have like a party. That's not like the way. It's always been very exclusive and everybody is so pretentious about their brands and their designs, and we try
Mm.
to do the opposite part there and to get like a use all of the senses to create something that is like bigger than the different parts. It's also like super fun because you will work for all with all typologies of creatives. So that's what I enjoy in it. So if I'm really selfish, why do you do this? Because it's crazy hard work to do those big events. It's like endless of work, to be honest, because everything that could go wrong always go wrong in an event. So you need to, you know, mind every single part. And you really, I'm super happy with the team that we have. It's like really, really good, and it's a gigantic team effort, and that's
Mm.
super fun. But then you work with musicians, you work with light technicians, you work with like with graphical designers and you work with interior designers, you work with food people who's like producing new food, and it's everybody's involved from all disciplines, and that's hard, but also really fun.
And I think also, as I think about beautiful thinking, it's that sort of, you know, cross-disciplinary energy exchange.
Yeah, and it's also like what I find like what we try to do with IKEA is always to have some kind of also collective creative process. It's not
Mm.
like here's like the great vision of Marcus. It's not like that at all. It's more like trying to come up with something fascinating together. So it's always like ping ponging back and forth with different disciplines and people, we don't always agree, of course, on things,
You
and
hope
that
not.
yeah,
That's where the
no,
beauty is.
but because it's kind of, and maybe that's still why I find this fascinating is because it's a learning process. It's kind of if you stop learning, it's like what's the use then?
Yeah, to bring curiosity to the mix, I think is highly important. I was going to ask you the Annie Leibovitz that you announced last year that's coming up and that we're talking about today. I'm curious, artist in residency program, fascinating.
The very idea is to have like fresh eyes on things. You know, when you've been in a company for 80 years, that's quite a long time, and it's easy to get caught in your own idea. So I want people who could challenge that, who's free to challenge it also, and free to challenge the views on things. So we see, we also, challenge ourselves from out of it. So it's not about like putting them there and do like an interpretation of IKEA, rather to add something to IKEA that we don't have today by being themselves. So that's what I wanted with it. This time around, it's like it's photography. Next time, artist in residency might be something completely different.
Yeah,
Uh,
I would hope. I would expect nothing less.
No, you shouldn't either. No.
Will you be doing once a year? Have you thought about timing, or how is it? How is that?
No, this is like I mean, I kind of like this thing of us being on a curious excursion. If as soon as you put things into systems, I've seen that it's a great way of killing creativity and
Mm,
making it into like an everyday part of what you do. So I think we should challenge ourselves. Sometimes the thing could go for 2 years. Sometimes it's just for a weekend. So why should we decide those things? It's actually what we want to achieve that is the important part, not that we have a systematic approach to it.
I love that. And the other thing I love about this, and I'm so excited to see the images.
They're lovely, I could tell you.
Oh, I'm so excited. Staying in the IKEA lane, I imagine Annie's going to places. They may not have IKEA products in their home, or they may, but it's not about that. It's really about really getting to the core and the ethos of the relationship to the home. But also, I love the mentees aspect to it too. I was so excited when I saw that because I feel like you were doing a lot around the world about, diversity and inclusion, which is important work that we need to be doing. But I love the intergenerational aspect of it and bringing in, young photographers under the tutelage of Annie. What was the thinking behind that, and what's the hope for that? Because to have somebody's, if I'm that person having one of my photos hang in a gallery next to one of Annie's is just like mind blown moment.
Yeah, isn't that about generosity? I think everybody who's working in like or are senior in working with design or art or anything there. I think that the good ones always have quite a generous approach to things. For me, it's always been like important for both IKEA and myself, for that sake, to share the things to create like to make the next generation curious about how we could make change. Annie did her thing going around, but then when we started out talking together about it, we both felt like really, really good about it. But let's do a mentee program. We didn't really know how to do it. She had made like speeches for people before, but not really a mentee program.
Hmm.
So this has become a far bigger and far more fun part of what we have done together than just the intention we had from the beginning. So it's just grown. We said that we would do a couple of sessions, but it grown and grown and grown because it became so interesting. And also these young photographers are so super talented, and it
Yeah.
was so nice to see their work and how they spoke about their work and what was important to them in their work, and how to realize their ideas, and also really beautiful to see how Annie shipped into it. I mean, after all, she's kind of a legend in photography, and
Hmm.
everybody was very intimidated in the beginning in the discussions, and then it's like best friend situation after a while
Oh,
instead, which was really beautiful. So I kind of I enjoyed it a lot, I must say.
is there anything in the show that you were surprised by or you didn't expect?
I think, of course, there's a lot of things in these pictures that I don't think that when we talk about what we have done and what we want to achieve, that what we're going to present in Paris is maybe not what people expect from how you are picturing or want to picture a home and life at home. What we learned also, and this is coming back, this is like circle here of our discussion, is that maybe the home is not so much about actually the how the four walls are and what kind of carpet you have and so forth, but it was more about people. So it became more and more interesting to us to see how people are a part of the home. It's the person
Yeah.
that makes the home, and that's something. If you look upon how most interior design is pictured, it's without people, which
Yeah.
is quite strange,
It's like a
actually.
museum gallery. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And when it is people, they're kind of used as props rather than personalities,
Mhm.
which is also quite strange.
I want to talk about Skewed, and when you left your post as head of design and you founded Skewed Productions, which, as I understand it, is sort of a collective of people who are create and shaping the future of brand in retail. Do I have that right?
Yeah, you could. I mean, it's a multidisciplinary thing.
Yeah.
We work with the thing that interests us all, which is like, you know, the connections between design and communication, and that's usually happening in two different places. We want to happen in one place,
Mm,
and that's what we work with. And sometimes those designs and communications are made for like retail design. Sometimes it's product design. Sometimes it's something else. So we're in all different parts there. But it's always about this kind of getting rid of the whispering game. I want to go to the core of things and to see to that you could bring like what you want to achieve. So it's not like diluted by the whispering game in between different parties all the way. So I really stay true to the original idea and to bring it out there. So that's what it's all about, and which is very close to what I also do for IKEA. And
like I almost think about Skewed as sort of almost an R&D or a sort of social experiment to try things on a smaller platform place, and then you can then bring that back. It seems like there's a lot of exchange between because IKEA you hire them as well too, so it's kind of it's very interesting to me for you to have this sort of thing outside, but then it also connects back to your world and what you're doing.
yeah, but it's a luxury, of course, but it's also like not to be so single-minded. I want to see how things work in other parts of life and design life also, because it's very different to work with fashion or to work with sports or to work with cars towards how it is to work with home furnishing, which I've been brought up with. So it's to see how what's the similarities and how could you take on those things. They
Yeah.
sit with different problematics. So for me, again, I think it's been good both for IKEA and for other clients. This ability to work in so many different fields with so many different problems is more like giving us a wider range of possibilities to cross-reference. So you can see things that maybe if you're just specialized, you don't see. And I think that's been important to me. That's why I've never stayed in exactly the same field. Even if I've always like had a great relation with IKEA along the way for like the last 30 years, it's always been like branching out to different areas. And also when I work within IKEA, it's not so much about what they have done, but what we could do.
And
Uh,
I think that's amazing because a lot of people, especially in the creative space, will do the side hustle, right? They'll do I have this on the side, but I've never really understood that because for me it's just everything is everything, and so I really love your model that you create the standalone entity. You have other clients, you do other things, but it is fuel and an engine for thinking outside of the context of this, IKEA brand, which is massive, but could also, I would imagine, like you said, anything needs different perspectives and fresh perspectives.
Thank you. The things that we do within Skewed is different typologies. It's also like different people. So I want to collect like friends and people, both inside of companies, but also inside of IKEA. The ones that you surround you with are also your main inspiration.
I did want to briefly end with, you've spent your whole life in some way because of your whole family. You've been in IKEA.
Sounds so
In
sad when you say this.
No,
Yeah.
no, I think it's amazing. But I'm curious to hear. I think I've heard a lot about how you've helped shape IKEA, but I'm wondering how this experience in your career has shaped you and how you live and how you stay grounded and the power of ritual.
I mean, working with IKEA from the very start and being brought up like in a designer's home and an IKEA home had made me more conscious about my surroundings than everyone else. I think what made the biggest difference with working with this in this field is that I'm at the same time as I'm curious and try a lot of new things, and I'm like the first one to buy stuff when it comes something new. I'm also really conscious about, especially for home furnishing items, that not to buy things that I get bored of, or that that your eyes will get tired of too fast. So it's quite classic things in my home and surroundings that we have in the family, and like it's pieces of, like, I've always loved, like, since I was small, like Alvar Aalto, for instance. There is a lot of Alvar Aalto because this is like livable things and it's great materials. It's a crafted way of putting things together also. So I don't want to surround me with things that is like I get tired of, because that would be that's doesn't feel right. So that's something that has changed me a lot. Then on an everyday basis, it's more like, I think IKEA, which is the great thing with IKEA, is that it's like it's not like a work that you go to and you just get paid and then you go off. It's like something. I wouldn't say that it's a lifestyle, because it's not, but it's like the trust the company has given me to do things has made me grow a lot. In a lot of companies, you get like a job. At IKEA, I think you get trust to do stuff. And that's a little bit like a different approach. And it taught me also how you get the best out of people. It's not always to give them like a task. It's more like to give them trust to do something and then explore how you could get there. And I think this is like maybe the greatest things IKEA has like taught me. And the way that I was maybe especially like back in the day when it was smaller, when I started, that was like a great way of growing an idea that was called IKEA. So I think that's my biggest learning, to be honest.
That's lovely. I love that. The last thing, and I ask everybody, is how would you define beautiful thinking?
Oh, that's a hard one. I think beautiful thinking to me is something where it's not about yourself. It's when you're not putting yourself first in things. Actually, it's kind of an easy thing to say, but maybe harder to do. I think the fundament of beautiful thinking is actually your ability to be empathic, to show empathy. And I think that's also like a super important part of doing great design, is to have empathy for different people's situations and really in depth understand and want to do something about it together with them. So for me, that's beautiful thinking. It's all about that.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Beautiful Thinkers podcast. To follow along this season, subscribe to the podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts, and follow us at The Beautiful Thinkers on Instagram and LinkedIn. Music by Midwest Got It.